Talk more about those movements now. We've got Chantal Marx from FNB Wealth and Investments who joins us this evening for the wrap of the market day. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Chantal. Let's start with the overall market on the JSE today. We did see towards the end of last week a lot of market movements being driven by the US's debt ceiling, the increasing thereof, and whether negotiations to increase that ceiling will actually be successful. What would you say were some of the big drivers today?
Well, low volume was probably the biggest driver of the market today, and that's why you saw the market kind of trading sideways and really not a lot happening in terms of news flow either. We had the US is actually closed tonight or this afternoon and tonight for a public holiday. So there's no trading in the US, which means markets globally generally will have lower volumes. What we did see over the weekend, though, was that there was an agreement in principle on the lifting of the US debt ceiling, politicians sitting around the table and getting to some sort of an agreement. But there's still a bit of caution, I think, around the debt ceiling because it still has to go through Congress on Wednesday and through the Senate. So a lot can still happen before that is set in stone.
Chantal, before we get into some company updates, what is happening with the local unit? It remains quite under a bit of pressure against major global currencies. It's really struggled to shake off those dips that it's been in for the last few days.
Yeah, so the rand was actually pretty stable for most of today and kind of in the middle of the pack relative to other emerging market currencies if you can compare it to the US dollar and some of the other majors. But the rand remains in a very weak trading range at the moment. And we know that there's a lot of reasons for this. It's the whole story around the Lady R, so some geopolitical risks coming in there. There was the grey listing earlier this year. There's the impact of load shedding and what that could mean for South Africa's economic growth and the health of our fiscus. And also commodity prices coming under pressure. So South Africa's terms of trade or what our financials look like, if we consider imports and exports, deteriorating quite significantly over the last few weeks. So a lot is in the rand at the moment. You could argue that it's overshot itself a little bit. So hopefully, if we get a resolution to some of the global issues, which aren't SA specific, we could see some strengthening there. But still, a lot needs to happen locally, I think, for the currency to take a meaningful step down. Mainly, I think, resolving the situation or the geopolitical situation at the moment that we find ourselves in. And then I think load shedding probably also a big factor there, something that can be solved, but that will probably take some time.
Some company updates now. Let's start with Steinhoff. Chantal, this is interesting. So they are having issues with their restructuring. Lenders happy for them to implement a restructuring plan that will prevent them from going into bankruptcy and having a flash sale of all its assets. But shareholders aren't too keen on this plan. What is the story around Steinhoff's restructuring? And ultimately, what are we likely to see according to what they released in terms of a communication to shareholders?
Yeah, shareholders initially voted down a very similar plan that was constructed by the company themselves over December. They voted it down in January. And the reason that shareholders are unhappy is because they will lose a big chunk of their economic interest in Steinhoff. And what that means is that they won't be able to participate in a potential turnaround or a return to profitability once that company gets out of the difficulty that it's facing currently. The company is arguing that, well, our liabilities are a lot more than our assets. Our lenders are very unhappy, and they could actually force us into liquidation, in which event shareholders will get absolutely nothing. So the management team of Steinhoff then went into a formal restructuring program, or like a formal business rescue almost type scenario called WOW under Dutch law. And they came up with a very similar restructuring plan to what Steinhoff management put forward in December. And investors were again unhappy. That's not equity investors or ordinary shareholders, because it looked exactly the same as what they voted down in January. I think at this point, shareholders feel like they have nothing to lose, so they may as well hold out for a better deal, and that is why they keep on voting down basically a loss of their position in Steinhoff. I'm not sure how it's going to play out going forward, but I think it could get a lot more complicated, and hopefully we can get some direction from the company in terms of what they are planning to do as a next step now that shareholders have again decided not to back another restructuring.
Very interesting times for Steinhoff indeed, Chantal. And then there's also Telkom, the former CEO looking to get back into the business via his investment firm, and the PIC willing to back that particular acquisition of 35% stake in Telkom. The share price performing really well on the back of that announcement. Your thoughts, given the abysmal trading update that they gave us last week?
Yes, so the trading update was reasonably weak, and I mean we expected it to be quite difficult for Telkom. But what really surprised investors last week was the fact that they wrote down the value of their assets quite substantially. I think about 13 billion rand worth of write-offs. At the time, investors speculated that they could be preparing themselves for some sort of a bid, and then over the weekend, the news broke that this bid could come from the former CEO. I think at this point, Telkom is looking for a suitor. As a standalone company, it is really struggling to make any sort of headway, but it has very valuable assets and assets that can be utilized to great effect if it's combined with something else. So I think that this bid makes sense because Telkom's share price has been under a whole lot of pressure. And it also follows bids that we saw come through last year from Rain and MTN. So I would be quite interested to see what comes through from their side. At this point, this looks like it's going to be a 35% equity stake. So nothing to get too excited about for shareholders, I think. But I mean, that's just the rumor at the moment. Hopefully someone can come with a more concrete offer, particularly for some of those really interesting assets like the mobile business and the fiber business, and we can unlock some value. The share's still down about 40% over the last year.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I was hoping we'd touch on Zeda as well, but time is against us as usual, Chantal Marx. But thank you very much for joining us. She's from FNB Wealth and Investment, wrapping up the market day that was on this Monday.